everyone. Welcome to the Zest, the official podcast of Orange Coast Magazine. I'm Chelsea Raineri, and today's guest is a globally recognized leader in contemporary art who has reshaped what modern museums can be. She's the first woman to build 2 major art museums, has raised more than $200 million to transform cultural institutions, and has worked to make art more accessible. From curating hundreds of exhibitions to leading the Aspen Art Museum and the UC Irvine Langson Orange County Museum of Art, and now expanding the conversation through her About Art platform, her career has been defined by curiosity, vision, and bold leadership. Please welcome Heidi Zuckerman. I am in love with everything that you did with OCMA or UC Irvine Langson Orange County Museum of Art.
Yeah.
When it first opened, you guys had the Daniel Arsham exhibit. And I think I went to that maybe like 4 times I just had to keep bringing different groups of friends to come experience it. And I still go all the time to this day. So very much a fan of your work.
Thank you so much. And that was a really great show. It was really popular and there were so many different aspects that people were attracted to. And one of my favorite things was that some people thought we were a Pokemon museum and they kept coming back for that.
Oh, no way. That's so funny. I love that. I could see how they would think that there was a lot of Pokemon stuff, but the car was also really cool too.
Yes.
What an incredible artist.
He's an amazing artist, and the way that he takes things that are familiar to us and then shows us what they might look like in some future unknown time and place. It's really so unique and such a great and inspired way to think about art.
100%. I loved it. And the crystals and stuff was so pretty. But okay, so going back to the beginning of your story, what was your childhood like? And when do you remember first feeling curious about art or creativity?
You know, it's such a great question. And my childhood was memorable in lots of different ways. My grandmother was a collector. She came from an immigrant family and only had a 3rd grade education, but she fell in love with art. And I was the oldest grandchild. So about 8 years old, I was her favorite travel companion. So I got to travel with her and go to museums around the world. And it's not necessarily that I knew that I was being indoctrinated into the love of art, but I found out later that I had all this latent art knowledge that I was interested in. And she would send things to our house when she ran out of space, and my parents weren't really interested in them. So it was up to me to make up my own stories about them and have them keep me company. And I really don't remember a time before when I was captivated by art.
Wow, what an incredible experience getting to travel the world and see art. Do you remember being drawn to a particular style, or you just loved it all?
You know, I loved going to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. It's still one of my favorite museums. And I've always liked art objects like painting, sculpture, photography. But I've also my grandmother also collected decorative art. So I've always been interested in ceramics and silver and tapestries and fashion. And I love that museum because it's sort of like a lifestyle museum in addition to an art museum. And it just gets your mind going to think about how all these things that we live with and work with and are surrounded by every day are made by someone with intention who might want to make you feel a different way or have you have a different level of comfort, or that just kind of creativity that can be part of every day was something that I remember learning at that museum really early on.
I'm so bummed. The last time I was in London, I was too busy going to the Harry Potter Museum. I should have gone to that one, but I'll have to go next time.
Yes. Yeah. It'll be there. It'll be there for you.
Yeah. Well, as a college student, I read that you cold called art galleries looking for a summer job, which I have to admit, I could not have cold called as a college student. But what did that first gallery experience open up for you?
You know, I came home for the summer and I had 4 months off and I thought I should get a job. And for inspiration, I looked in the phone book, and dates me for sure. And I started at the A's and it said art gallery. And I thought that would be interesting. And I just started calling them. And to be honest, I lied. I said I was an art history student, which I wasn't at the time. But when I got down to the S's, a woman named Paula Kirkeby at Smith Anderson Gallery asked me where I went to school and invited me to come in. And I mean, I was 18 years old. I knew a lot about computers because my dad was an early Silicon Valley guy. And that was a time really before everyone knew about computers. And so I was able to use a skill that, again, I didn't know was special, but I basically cataloged all of the objects in the gallery's inventory and came up with a system that made things easier. So I quickly made myself, I don't know, not totally indispensable, but important, right?
Totally.
And I think what I learned from that is that you have an opportunity to look for gaps and figure out where you can step in and help in a way that you haven't necessarily been asked to help yet, but you can see that there's a need. And without stepping on anyone's toes or making anyone feel uncomfortable, if you can make yourself really needed, then it's great for job security.
Yeah, totally. That's such an, like, I remember my dad was also really, not Silicon Valley level, but was really into computers when I was younger. And so I learned like spreadsheets and stuff like that. And I was like, this is, it was really valuable in the beginning. Well, early in your career,
and
you
also, sorry, I was just going to say, it's also great to do things that other people don't want to do. Right.
Yes.
So one of the other things that I realized pretty early on that I was really good at was fundraising and doing things. And we'll probably talk about it later, but also figuring out like, what are things that no one else really wants to do? And then how can you become really good at it? It's another way also to help build your career.
Yeah. So you found that other people did not like fundraising?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Really? Yeah. How come? Why do you think that is? Just challenging?
I think that I think money is a complicated topic and it's sort of taboo for a lot of people and for women in particular. And I think when people are uncomfortable with something or around something, they would just prefer to do something else. And I didn't have that. I felt like it was fun. It's not like I was raising money for myself. I was raising money for things that I believed in. And so I always thought about fundraising as offering an opportunity for people to be part of something that I thought was really cool and important. And if it made sense to them and they saw a place for themselves, and they would say yes. And if they didn't, they would say no. And I didn't take it personally.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective and way to look at it. I always joke, my husband's in sales, like that. If I was selling something, I'd be like, if you don't want it, like, no worries, like, no pressure. I would have a hard time fundraising as well. Well, early in your career, you held curatorial roles at institutions, including the Jewish Museum in New York and the Berkeley Art Museum. So what did those formative years teach you about how art institutions actually work behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I recently was contacted by some students at Berkeley who are doing research projects on some of the shows that I did there. And that feels really kind of amazing to have the opportunity to see some of those shows were 20 years ago, honestly, and to be able to see what I still remember. I mean, everything about all of those shows and all of the interactions with the artists. And so what I learned at the Jewish Museum, I used to joke, and it wasn't just me, but we would joke that like all of our visitors were like 4'9", under 5 feet, because they were like students, school kids, right? Or, we would say like little old ladies. And so being able to show contemporary art to a necessarily aware contemporary art audience made me be really specific about what I was interested in and why I was interested in it and how I could get other people excited and enthusiastic about it. And so that was really, really great training to, I think, have a career trying to mostly to get people to care about something that they don't necessarily do. And then at Berkeley, it was great to be able to have access to students who were a little bit older. We had a lot of school kids at the Jewish Museum, but then college students. And again, getting people exposed to art as young as possible has such a lifetime impact. So the younger you get people excited about art, the more they'll be interested in it over time. And again, I've always been interested in storytelling and making the art as available as possible. So even though I have a graduate degree in art history, I've never been interested in art speak or polysyllabic words or making anyone feel like art isn't for them. So starting with these audiences that weren't necessarily coming to the museum for a contemporary experience, because both of these museums showed art other than contemporary art as well, was a great training.
Yeah, I have actually, there's a book that I was reading and it was talking about like a sign of intelligence is being able to explain a really complicated subject in really plain language in simple ways. So that would be like, I can totally see how that would be really good training with the kids.
Yes, absolutely. And, I talk sometimes about my dad, who I referenced earlier. He was an inventor, had a lot of patents, and he would come home and be really excited about whatever it is he had invented that day and would talk to us about it at dinner. And none of us knew what he was talking about ever. And, when I was a kid, it was a little bit frustrating because I felt like I couldn't relate to him. But I learned a really amazing life lesson, which is to be able to sit in the place of not knowing and to be comfortable not understanding something. And it's almost like when you learn a new language, if you try and get every word, you can't get it. But if you get every third word or, every sixth word, then things start to make sense to you over time. And that's how I think about art too. When we talk about it, if people don't understand every single word, that's okay. You just sort of relax into it and take what makes sense to you.
Yeah, totally. I love that idea of it's like a language. That's because I remember taking Spanish in college and stuff like that. And yeah, I can still pick up I can have a gist of what people are saying, but I can't speak it fluently.
Exactly.
Totally. Well, you spent 14 years actually, you've curated more than 200 exhibits, often supporting artists early in their career. So when you first encounter an artist, what sparks the sense that their work will have a lasting impact? I feel like that'd be hard to see.
It's so interesting because I had a podcast earlier today of my own podcast, and I had a woman who has her own podcast, and I asked her, how do you choose what works you focus on? And she said, it's kind of intuitive. And I would say it's a little bit like that for me too. I obviously have a background in art history. And so I'm thinking about artists in the history of art and who's done what before and how it feels new or different or surprising. And then there's also just sort of like this gut feeling, which is I feel like I'm seeing something that I want to see more of. Sometimes because I love it, sometimes because I don't understand it, sometimes because it makes me like profoundly uncomfortable in my skin. And that's usually how I can tell. I'm looking for something that I've never really seen or felt before. And it can be in any kind of medium. And it doesn't happen that often, but when it happens, I almost always know it.
Wow. I love that. I'm thinking of, OCMA recently had Deanna Templeton's artwork, and
Yes.
Ed Templeton had a part there too. And yeah, hers was extremely vulnerable and honest. And I remember relating into it and it just taking me right back to my high school experience and just being like, wow, this is, yeah. So I can kind of, that's the first, I think, exhibit where I actually felt something like what you're talking about.
Yeah. And once you felt it, once you feel seen by art, by an artist, it's kind of addictive, to be honest. And now you kind of keep looking for it. You keep kind of getting drawn to it. And that is a perfect example. That work was so vulnerable and she made it over such a long period of time. And when she made it and she was writing in her journals early on, she never could have imagined being an artist and having the work showing in a museum. But then it's sort of a reminder for people to save what you write, to save if you take a photograph, to save your clothes. You have an opportunity to kind of bring things back and to look at them with fresh eyes and to have that authenticity and that vulnerability around those experiences. That's how people relate to each other. And honestly, that's how we build community. So I'm a huge fan of her and her work and Ed as well.
Same. Well, you spent 14 years transforming the Aspen Art Museum, including building a new museum from the ground up. What was the biggest leap of faith that you had to take during that chapter?
Oh my gosh, there were so many. I had a vice president of my board who was an incredible guy. Just anytime the board had a question about whether we should move forward or if we were doing the right thing or what our probability of success was, he just was such a leader. He was the board chair of another museum in a different city and kind of an elder statesman. People looked to him. And I'll just never forget at the opening of the museum, he looked to me and he said, "Well done." He said, "I gave you about a 27% chance of success. And I was like, what? You only gave me like a 27% chance of success. You were such a great voice of like advocacy and wisdom the whole time. And he said, oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I wanted you to be able to do it. I just didn't think you'd be able to. And so I think my biggest takeaway is from that was, like one thing at a time, just do the next thing, like right in front of you, and don't get swept away by all the what ifs or if then or what might happen, and just do the next thing. And if some days like you can't do the next thing, just give yourself that space and that grace and get a good night's sleep and wake up the next day and try to do the next thing. It really seemed like it was an impossible task. And
yeah.
I read this Eleanor Roosevelt quote the other day, which said, you have to do things that you don't think you can. And I just love the wisdom in that. I'm doing some running right now. And some days I'm like, there's no way. There's no way. But you just do it. You just literally one foot in front of the other. You just kind of keep going.
Yeah. All of that was really great life advice because, I can feel overwhelming when you look at like the end goal and all the steps it's going to take to get there. But I like that, just taking what's right in front of you and doing it that one step makes it more achievable.
Definitely.
When you look back on being the first woman to build 2 major art museums, what moments or experiences made you feel that full significance of that achievement?
When we did the opening at the Orange County Museum of Art, I had the experience of having done the Aspen Art Museum. So there were some things I knew that I liked to do and wanted to try and do in a new community. And one of them was the 24-hour opening. And, selling people on that, particularly like our team, that, there are challenges within that. But everyone got on board. Everyone was excited. And I remember one of the donors turned to me and he said, do you think people are going to come? And I said, yeah, I do. I think a lot of people are going to come. We've been sending out weekly emails. I had done a lot of media. I kept inviting everyone. I kept saying like, you're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Come. This is your museum. And he said, well, what do you think we're going to get? Like maybe 1,000 people? And I said, no, I think we're going to get a lot more. And when I got to stand there in front of, 4,000 or 5,000 people who had waited in line for 8, 10 hours already. And then they waited all through the night. And, we had over 10,000 people in the first 24 hours. We even turned away another 3,000 or 4,000 people. But standing there in front of the microphone with the guys that were drumming and they were playing Tonight's Going to Be a Good Night and by the Black Eyed Peas and then having like the fireworks go off and everyone sort of lose their mind. I was like, this is memorable. This is really important. And I was hoping that we were creating something that would serve the community, that we were filling a need that people wanted, but you didn't know until it happened. And that day people came and they just kept coming. We had 20,000 people in the first 5 days and 260,000 people in the first year and, more the second year. And it just was so exciting. And, we're coming off the pandemic and a lot of time that people probably felt isolated and at home. And so there was probably great alignment, in a lot of ways. And I'm just so proud of that. And that particular moment, even as I'm describing it for you, my whole family was there and it was just so exciting. Like the energy of it was amazing.
I had full body chills when you were saying the numbers of people that had came. That's so incredible. And the staff that works at the museum too is just so welcoming and kind. And I don't know, sometimes maybe this is just a me thing, but when I go to a museum, I feel like maybe a little intimidated, like, oh, this is talk quietly. Like, this is, I don't know, something about it. But every time I go to the Orange County Museum of Art, everyone's just so welcoming and kind and makes you feel free to walk around and make yourself at home kind of thing.
It is not just you. And for whatever reason, that's how museums have been thought of for a long time. And so when I came and opened the Orange County Museum of Art, the idea was to address that kind of feeling that you had straight on and do something different. So we had all the front of house staff wear oatmeal instead of black.
Oh,
We created, so we were trying to make like an art spa. We created a scent that was in the museum. So it would just make people kind of relax. We were looking for a shoulder lowering effect and, trying to model the behavior of, you don't want people running in the museum and you don't want people touching stuff unless they're supposed to. But other than that, like if you laugh, that's great. If you talk in a loud voice, that's great. If you're so excited about something that you share with someone else, that we want that. We want that for sure.
Totally. Wait, saying the spa-like feeling is so accurate because I leave feeling refreshed when I go. I went to see the Deanna Templeton exhibit by myself. And it was just, so relaxing. It was just so nice to be in there and just to get to be surrounded by art. And everyone's that's standing around kind of like monitoring. They're like eager to answer any questions that you have and like talk with you art. So it's not like, they're not like watching you in an intimidating way. It's like, what do you want to know? Like, I'm happy to help you.
Exactly. And, I always say that my favorite thing to do is to look at art with other people because everyone sees things differently. And, it's, I guess, like a better kept secret than it should be, which is that museums want people to come. Artists want people to look at their work. People want to be engaged. That's why they make it. Mm-hmm. Everyone should come. Everyone's welcome.
Yeah, I love that. So when you arrived at OCMA in your first 100 days, you listened to what people loved about the museum and where they felt it fell short. Why was that so important to you as a leader stepping into this institution?
So important. I learned when I was running the Aspen Art Museum that you really have to ask the community what it is they want. And a lot of times institutions make the mistake that they say, we're showing you this X community because it's a member of your community. And so you should come, right? And it just doesn't work that way. And so we did this amazing program in Aspen, which was called Arte en Español. And we asked the community, what would you like? What would make it viable for you to come? And people said, we want food, we want music, and, if there's an opportunity to fund transportation. So we did that. And the first time we did it, we thought we'd get, like 15 people, maybe we got like 50 or 60 people. The second time we thought we'd get, maybe 50 or 60 people. We got like 500 people. And we ended up winning the national medal for that community program. And so when I came to Orange County, I was like, I'm not from here. I lived in Northern California. I grew up here, but I had never lived in Southern California. Never lived in Orange County. And I didn't want to come in and tell people what they should like or what they should see or, why they should come to the museum. I'm not good with shoulds at all. I don't like to be told what to do. So I went around and I asked people these questions because I wanted to be of service and I wanted to create an institution that was what people wanted and needed, not that, someone from the outside thought that they should have.
Right. Mentioning the food at the museum, I remember my husband and I, every time we go, we get like a little appetizer and a glass of wine, and then we go walk around the museum. And it's a full experience. My dream is to one day do the museum and then go to Segerstrom and then get dinner. So it's like on my to-do list. But under your leadership, the attendance skyrocketed, which we talked about, and the museum became free to the public for its first 10 years. So why has accessibility been such a core part of your philosophy around art?
It goes back to what we talked about a little bit with this idea of money and the association of money and value. And a lot of times people have to make really tough decisions about what they spend their money on. And if they don't necessarily have access to art or exposure to art, they don't necessarily know what the value is. And so trying to get someone to allocate their limited resources, everyone has limited resources, to something that they may not really understand or be curious about, the equation just doesn't work. And to be able to say, look, we think this has value, so we're going to get someone to underwrite the cost of it so that we can offer it to everyone for free. It's just an inherently generous act, I think. And, I've said before that I think that access to art is a basic human right and not a privilege. And the barrier of entry, the economic barrier of entry is usually the most significant. So there are other ones, of course, some of which we can see and some of which are invisible, and we have to try and address all of them. But the economic one is frankly the easiest to solve if you're good at fundraising. And so taking that one off the table was really important.
Definitely. Well, speaking of fundraising, you've raised over $200 million across two institutions. So what did you learn to bridge creativity, or how did you learn to bridge creativity and business so effectively?
Thank you. It goes back to this idea of value and what you believe in and offering an opportunity. And artists need money. Institutions need money. Things have, I mean, we live in a capitalistic society, right? So if you want to be able to create things and you want to be able to offer them to the broadest possible audience, you have to come up with ways to fund them. And instead of being like upset about that or intimidated by that, I often say wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. So artists need money, institutions need money. Someone has to ask for it. And I always felt like it was an honor and a privilege to be able to offer that opportunity to people who could make the decision to help provide these experiences. And I don't know about business and creativity. For me, it's all kind of one part of the same thing, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. I totally also understand the idea of offering an opportunity to someone like that. Like that, I would feel so honored if I was able to help make the museum free for 10 years. That's such a,
right?
Yeah. I would
People
feel so
want to be a part of something, right? I think if you're lucky enough that you have any time that you don't have to be, working or caring for someone, right? If you're lucky enough to have any free time, then I think what people really want is to be part of something that matters. And I believe that providing that kind of access to art really matters, and giving people the opportunity to do that and to do well, to do good. I think people are appreciative of it, honestly. They're grateful 100%. For it.
Yeah. Okay. I loved when I was researching you, I loved this. You talked about encountering art unexpectedly, like on lift tickets or in public spaces. So why do you think those unplanned moments of art can be so powerful?
It goes back to this idea of what people think is for them. And sometimes people think, they're not welcome to make noise in a museum or to laugh in a museum or whatnot. And people are sometimes guarded when they're in a situation where they feel like their expectations that are already set, and they're cautious. Am I supposed to stand here? Am I supposed to say that? Like, can I bring my bag? Can I bring food? People, they don't really know what to do. And when people don't know what to do, they often don't do anything. And so by putting art in front of people in unexpected places, they get a more unfiltered response. So when, for example, you go to pay for your lift ticket and you're handed something by Jim Hodges, which was a beautiful colored text piece which said, "Give more than you take." It's a surprise. And you get to ask yourself the question, what? Am I giving more than I take? Is the ski company giving more than they take? What does that mean? What is giving? What is taking? Am I a giver? Am I a taker? And people are just open, and the impact is so much more significant when people haven't already said like, "Oh, that's contemporary art. That's not for me." So I love that idea of sort of surprising people, catching them off guard. And then afterwards, people realizing, "Oh, that was art. I actually liked that. I thought that was cool. Maybe I want more."
Totally. I experienced this a lot when we were in Japan. There's art everywhere, just in the everyday spaces. And so I just loved it so much. I was like, this is so, like, everything, the art is so cute too, like the little characters and stuff. So I totally understand that. Well, in 2019, you founded About Art, expanding into media, publishing, and global conversations. So what prompted this shift from institutional leadership to building your own platform?
It's kind of a continuation because, from my earliest time at the Jewish Museum, I, again, was interested in getting people who weren't necessarily used to or looking for contemporary art, giving them access. And I love museums. I love the fact that it's a destination. I love that people can incorporate it into their day. And I also know a lot of times people can't do that. They might live they might not be able to do that. They might not live somewhere where there's an institution. They may not have any free time. And to be able to create a podcast, which is the main part of About Art, I would say, where people can listen in their car, or they can listen if they're going out for a run, or they can put it on while they're making dinner or folding the laundry or washing dishes, or for long haul truckers. It's an opportunity to get people access wherever they are without really making an ask of anyone. So again, it's free. It can come to you wherever you are. And that was really important to me.
Yeah, I love that so much. I am also one of those people that always has a podcast on in any of those types of aspects. So I love that idea of having art come to you in those moments. Well, you wrote a book called Why Art Matters, which reads both like a guide and a call to action. So what do you hope readers come to understand about themselves through art?
I have had such an incredible privilege to spend my life with art and artists. And what I have wanted to do is to try and share that. And so Why Art Matters, the bearable likeness of being, is really a companion. And I wrote it at a time when I was separated from my access to art, like everyone else was, mostly during the pandemic, but I wasn't in my own home where I do have art, and I wasn't in the institution where, of course, there's art. And so all I had was my memory and the ideas of works of art that I'd experienced before. And so as a way of kind of passing the time, I would think about what was happening in my life and my family and the world. And then I would think of an artwork that sort of reminded me of that. And then I would write about it. And the book talks about everything from, motherhood to fear to joy and respite. It's very widely spread. And the idea is that you can kind of look for anything that you need that particular day, and it'll be there for you. And then it's paired with a work of art. So you can identify with the storytelling and the content, and then you get to learn about an artist. So that's the goal.
That's so creative. I love that idea. I'm going to pick your book up now. That sounds like such an interesting concept.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that you would like to shout out for listeners to keep an eye out for in 2026? This will come out in about late spring.
Absolutely. I want to direct people to our website, which is aboutart.com. And from aboutart.com, you can actually buy Why Art Matters on the shop there. And there are some amazing podcasts coming up in the spring, including one with Jewel, who I was a little starstruck by. And she is talking about the work that she has on view starting in May at the Venice Biennale, and the work that she's done with kids and being of service. And I really admire people who can be creative across multiple disciplines. And the podcast is fantastic. So I would call people's attention to that. It's on Spotify, it's on Apple, and it's also on YouTube.
Amazing. I would be starstruck too. That's so cool. Well, we are coming to the end of our time, but before I let you go, I have 3 final questions for you that we call the Thoughtful 3. So first, what lessons from artists have most influenced your approach to leadership and creativity?
Life is a practice. You get to start over every day, and you get to make mistakes and just try your best.
I love that. Well, looking back, were there any moments of doubt or fear that made you question your path? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yes, all the time, many times. And I listen to Journey's Don't Stop Believin' while I drive my car very loud. And it just lifts my spirits. And most things just have to pass. You just kind of have to get through that particular moment. And that song, I don't know, it's 3 or 4 minutes long. And usually by the time it's over, I feel better. Or sometimes I have to listen to it 2 or 3 times, but it works for me every time.
That's so funny. Brene Brown talks about how like an emotion goes through your body within like 6 minutes or something. So that makes so much sense. Just play a song a couple times and that feeling will go away.
I hadn't heard that, but that makes sense that there's science behind my experience. Mm-hmm.
Totally. Well, lastly, looking back from cold calling galleries to shaping world-class institutions, what do you hope people take away from your journey?
I hope they take away from my journey that all things are possible if you have passion and commitment. Just keep going. And honestly, I did a public talk with Deanna Templeton and I asked her something similar. And she said, what I would want people to know is you matter. And she teared up and I teared up. And I think that's really the message. Whatever you're doing, just keep doing it and you matter.
I love that. Thank you so much for doing this podcast. And I love that we're ending it on such an amazing note. So I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for your interest. I'm glad for your attention. I'm super glad for the listeners. And again, happy to just be of service, connecting people to art.